The new year had come and gone in a blur for the Stobell Valley Railway. The engines had been busy over the festive period and they'd hardly had any time to relax. The only celebration was made on New Year's Day to mark the dawn of a new era, the age of British Railways. No longer were the engines' loyalties bound to separate companies, but to one, British Railways and its regions. As the SVR was ex-Great Western Territory, it was part of the Western region. Therefore, Repford sheds had seen an influx of visiting engines stopping off overnight. They were all friendly to the engines and had a lot to say. The sheds mostly saw Halls and Kings, but one manor had made its way there one day. He was nice enough, and even hauled a couple of trains in place of Vaughn, who was being repainted for marketing purposes. He was the first of the SVR engines to get the new British Railways logo. The last day that Vaughn was in the painting shop, another engine came instead of the manor. He was a Hall, who had no problem in pointing out all of the flaws in every engine there. He especially rounded on Vaughn, who he found extra pleasure in bullying. I mean, look at him. No shape at all, just a black box on wheels, no use to anyone with eyes. Just take a look at this fine example of an engine. The city has power and looks. Hey, don't drag me under your stupidity. Such a shame everyone around here doesn't realise that the Great Western Railway always deserves respect from lesser regions, and especially respect from an ugly duckling. Although you southern lot are all the same, you were designed by a bullied. A load of spam cans if ever I saw them. It's like Bullied actually had no imagination at all when he designed you. Right, listen here, you brass-covered maniac. Whatever looks may have been lost on Bullied's designs, they can more than make up for it with their power and performance. But at least I look nice, whilst having power and performance. Not this black, boxy, ugly duckling. If you'll excuse me, I have its train to take. The Hall steamed away, leaving the engines in the shed, seething with anger, and Vaughn feeling very upset. Don't listen to him, Vaughn. He's just jealous that a class of your size can have so much power. Please don't believe that all Western locos think that. You know that I admire you and your class. You're very useful in your own way. As am I, and Stan. But at least you two look the part. He's right. I'm just an ugly duckling on wheels. The Hall called over as he passed. At least you can admit it. Whack! Piss off, you loony! The Hall laughed loudly and quickly started off with his service to Stoborough, leaving Stan, Stuart and Vaughan alone in the sheds once more. Please try to ignore him. He's a nutter, mate. Yeah, I wouldn't take too much of what he says to heart. Can't help it. He's horrible and, well, I don't know. He's right though. My class aren't exactly the best looking. But you can go just about anywhere on this line, including Revborough Heath. Shreya and I definitely can't go to Revborough Heath. Only as far as Revborough of a push. Anyway, enough of the depressing. How's that new paint job going? Well, it shouldn't be taking this long, but they want another coat of paint, so they're letting that dry this morning. And then they'll just put the decals on my tender, and I'll be ready for a management special this afternoon. That's great news, especially as you get a manager's train. That'll show that jumped up twerp that the SVR values its engine no matter what they look like. Vaughan still wasn't sure about this. Not long after this, the Hall had arrived at Fawley Junction, where he met Dan, who was surprised to not see the manor. So, what's happened to the manor? What's it to you, Squirt? How dare you? Have a little respect, eh? Pah! There's nothing to respect. I couldn't see you behind the large platform in front of you. Oh, go away. Disrespectful and downright rude. Sorry, couldn't hear you over the sound of the steam leaking out of your boiler. With this, the Hall steamed off, laughing loudly. Later that day, Vaughan was hauling his manager's train over the line. He looked absolutely impeccable in his new livery and was performing at his best. He had to stop at Fawley Junction to collect a few passengers who'd missed the Hall service because he'd refused to wait for Dan, who had been held up by geese on the line at Revborough. Dan was waiting in the station when he arrived. Oh, hello, Vaughan. Have you seen this totally disrespectful Hall going around recently? Oh, so you've been on the end of his incessant insults too. You've met him? Yeah, he was at Ratford earlier. Took particular pride in taking the mickey out of me. Stan told him to piss off, but he's been constantly insulting me on any chance he has. He really is starting to get to me, you know? And that's totally unacceptable. I hope he gets his just desserts soon. I'm so sorry for his behaviour. Right you are. With that, Vaughan departed. His trip was successful and he impressed the board of directors very much. He even gained an article in the Stowborough Gazette. The next day the manor was back, and was very apologetic towards the actions of the hall. They're all part of a group, you see, the Great Western Culture Preservation Society. They have quite a few members now, thanks to this grouping malarkey. That hall and a 56th class lead the society. It's quite funny, really. They're always followed around by a timid Collet 2251 class. He's pretty nice, but the 56XX seems to have him under control. Shame, really. You would have thought that a 56th class wouldn't have got very close to a hall at all. That's the funny thing. A tank engine like a 56 should know that it isn't his place to talk to halls. Even I didn't talk to the halls that much. I love how there's a divide between tank engine and tender engines. On the LMS everyone pulled together, even though I have to say most of our motive power is updated severely. That's the one thing I've heard about the LMS that I like. Everyone can speak to everyone, although I'm usually pretty chummy with the castles and kings that visit my home depot. It's all about being nice to them. If you respect them, they'll respect you. The Southern was a great railway to be on. What with all the elder designs around, they were wise and told us new engine what was what. But it was great to see the Pacifics take over a bit. I always liked the Pacifics. You Southerners are almost as bad as the LMS for elderly locomotives. Although I admit, I miss the elder designs on the Great Western, like the stars and whatnot. Even the Dean Goods are in decline, all their wisdom's being lost. Vaughn was happy that the manor had returned, and the fact that he was as civil to him as Stuart and Stan was strengthening his belief in the greatness of the Western region. This Great Western Culture Preservation Society was just a blip in the system. He and the manor pulled a goods train down to Stowborough that afternoon. A new contract had arrived for the railway. Flour and sugar had to be carried to the industrial estate at Stowborough, and the weight either meant that Stan had to pull it or it needed double heading. The two engines arrived at the bakery siding early and went to refuel at Stowborough sheds. They chatted well into the evening when it was time for them to leave once again to take the newly loaded wagons, now full of cake and bread, back to Repford. They arrived into Ratford where Vaughn said his farewells and ran into the sheds. The manor then disappeared with the train onto the main line and away. The next morning the hall had returned instead of the manor. "Out of my way, infidels! Make way for a proper engine!" "Will you quit it, you stuck-up old git?" "Temper, temper. You're going to need help over the line with that load. Let Vaughn pilot you over. You're in capable hands." "Let that thing pilot me. God, I'd be pushing and pulling. There's no time for that. I don't want my view to be spoiled by an old ugly duckling anyhow." The hall chuckled and steamed away with the heavy load. "20 minutes later, the shed foreman walked over to Stan and Vaughn, who were sitting in the sheds. Still. Lazy gits. "One of you two needs to go help out that stupid hall. He's managed to derail at Castle Stavell. The idiot didn't stop at Fawley Junction to pin down the brakes on the wagon, so he's paid the price." The two engines couldn't help but laugh. "I think Vaughn should go sort this one out." "Fair enough. Vaughn, are you happy with this?" "Oh yes, I'm very happy. I'll depart right away." So Vaughn steamed off in search of the catastrophic disaster that was the hall. He burst out of the tunnel at Castle Stavell and saw what had happened. The hall was now resting in the middle of a small wood next to the lake, with the rest of his load blocking the path. Vaughn got to work quickly and soon hauled the hall back onto the rails. He then proceeded to push the hall plus its heavy load down to the industrial estate. They arrived and Vaughn went to the front of the train, coupled up to the hall and dragged him away. They arrived at Stowborough sheds, where fitters started to immediately look over the hall. It looked like a lot of work was going to be needed. Stuart and Stan arrived not long after and couldn't help but laugh at the hall's situation. Just then Lord Stavell arrived. "Oi, you there, Mr. I'm better than everyone else. You severely disrupted services on this railway and caused a considerable damage to the line at Castle Stavell, not to mention the damage inflicted on that oak tree which has been there since before you were built. Believe me, if you were my engine and your fate rested with me, I'd have you scrapped tonight. But unfortunately, I have no such power over you. Therefore, tomorrow morning you will be taken back to Repford by Stan, where you will be transferred to a pick-up goods. From there you'll be taken back to your home depot where the Western region can deal with you. That is all." Oh, well done Vaughn for helping this waste of metal today. Unfortunately, if you'd let him stay where he was, the scrap merchants would have had free range, but obviously this wasn't to be. With that, Lord Savell marched off, leaving the engines laughing loudly, with the hull turning ever more the colour of puce. Well, I guess the ugly duckling turned into a swan for you today, eh? There was no reply but for a grumbling sound from the hull. The engines laughed even more heartily than before. Vaughan had shown that jumped up hole a thing or two, alright.